When the Falklands War began, many thought that the experienced British forces would quickly crush the Argentine men. However, the tenacity and courage of the South Americans took the invaders by surprise. Among the soldiers who gave the British the most headaches were the fighter pilots.
The Argentinian air attacks were relentless. British ships and Harrier aircraft shot down more than 60 enemy planes. But many Argentinian pilots were getting through to hit their targets.
Despite the fact that most of them were using much more outdated aircraft than their enemies, the pilots used daring maneuvers and the British underestimation to deal deadly blows. Days after what many considered a treacherous attack by the British, their ships were detected by the Argentines and the relevant orders were given. It was time for revenge. Completely surrounded by enemies and armed with missiles never before tested on the battlefield, nothing would stop these men from carrying out the mission assigned to them.
How the British task force commanders have underestimated the determination of the Argentine pilots.
This was the first time I'd seen ships sunk by enemy action in my life.
Today, in this new episode of Military History, we will tell you all about the sinking of the HMS Sheffield, a feat carried out by the brave Argentine pilots. By May 1982, the war between Argentina and the United Kingdom for the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands had already been going on for a month. However, it was at this time that the battles between the two countries began to intensify. Despite the initial victories by the South Americans, British forces were beginning to arrive on the islands in large numbers. The fighting became brutal as soldiers fought fiercely to take control of the disputed territory. It was in the afternoon of May 2nd that one of the most infamous events of the entire war occurred. The Argentine ship General Belgrano was sailing more than 50 kilometers from the total exclusion zone. Any ship that was outside this area was not considered a threat to the British. However, despite the fact that it was the British themselves who had designated the limits, the cruiser was hit by 2 torpedoes fired by the submarine Conqueror. The impacts opened a hole of almost 20 meters in the deck and killed hundreds of sailors, as well as completely destroying the engine room. The explosions also disabled most of the radio equipment and electrical systems. As water poured in, the crew of the General Belgrano was unable to pump it out or call for assistance from nearby ships.
La primera explosión que penetra en la sala de máquinas de popa, se confina dentro del buque, dentro del costado, posiblemente por las corazas que tenía a la altura de la línea de flotación, y comienza a acceder hacia arriba. Y entonces va destruyendo 4 cubiertas hacia arriba. Y destruye material y destruye gente. Material y hombres.
20 minutes after the explosions, the ship's captain knew that the ship was unsalvageable and gave the order to evacuate. But due to bad weather and the inability to make distress calls, it took hours or even days for the survivors to be rescued. 323 people, approximately a third of the total crew, died in the attack, drowning in the water or due to the impact of the torpedoes. This number represents almost half of the Argentine deaths in the entire Falklands War. The event remains surrounded by controversy even to this day. The British maintain that it was a valid act of war, while others continue to argue its illegality under the rules of war. Whatever the case, one thing was certain: the Argentine military would seek revenge. On May 4th, 2 days after the General Belgrano sank, a group of British ships were patrolling the Falklands archipelago. They had 2 aircraft carriers, 5 destroyers, and 3 frigates, as well as fighters flying over the area. One of the destroyers was the HMS Sheffield, which had entered service in 1971. Heavily armed, its crew numbered almost 300 men. That day, they had been assigned the mission of protecting the aircraft carriers from any threat. Visibility that morning was poor, with rain, strong winds, and fog that only allowed them to see what was right in front of them. The British ships, although they were attentive to the radars to detect enemy aircraft, did not expect retaliation to happen that day. They were more focused on locating underwater threats. However, poor visibility would also help the aircraft go unnoticed, something that the South American commanders did not overlook. In the early hours of May 4th, Argentine aircraft located in national territory detected a strange noise coming from the area that British ships were patrolling at that time. It was decided to send a Lockheed Neptune model scout plane with the objective of flying over the Atlantic waters to clarify the source of that sound. This design had been manufactured for the first time at the end of World War II, so it was already 40 years old and was far inferior to the types of planes used by the British Empire. Even so, it was entrusted with this important mission. But a little before 9 in the morning, the aircraft's radar observed something very different. 3 English ships, named Glasgow, Coventry, and Sheffield, were within close range.
Ce jour-là, le destroyer type 42 HMS Sheffield est en mission de couverture aérienne. Il est le plus au sud d'un dispositif de 3 navires dont il fait partie. Les navires de cette classe montrent à cette époque une certaine difficulté à être opérés à leur plein potentiel. Le radar d'avertissement type 965, très important pour la lutte antiaérienne, était défaillant ce 4 mai sur l'HMS Coventry. Le Sheffield avait donc pris sa place plus tôt dans la matinée.
The Neptune crew deactivated the radar to avoid detection and changed direction. They began to fly south of their position, with the aim of making the English forces assume that they were looking for shipwrecked General Belgrano and not open fire. When they were at a safe distance, the aircraft commander reported the discovery to his superiors, who ordered the scout to follow the trail of the enemy ships. After a short debate, they took a measure desired by many and feared by others: to attack. At the Rio Grande base in southern Argentina, a combat squadron began to prepare for the operation. It consisted of 2 Super Étendard fighters, which were armed with powerful Exocet-guided missiles. These used a method of fire called fire and forget. They were launched dozens of kilometers from the target without even having it in their field of vision, and in the vast majority of cases they hit the target. It was a state-of-the-art weapon that had a very advanced artificial intelligence for its time, and its own radar that allowed it to change direction even after being launched. Both the vehicles and their weapons had been purchased from France, a political ally of the United Kingdom, in 1979, 3 years before the outbreak of the Falklands War. If used, it would be the first time that one of these models had been put into action in history.
Au début de la guerre des Malouines, la France suspend les livraisons, mais 5 Exocet ont tout de même été livrés. Pour les marins du Sheffield, la menace Exocet est surfaite. Pourtant, les renseignements britanniques l'ont clairement identifié comme crédible.
When the British questioned their neighbors about the sale of the explosives, the French sought to calm their anxiety. In order to be able to be fired, they had to be fine-tuned, which had never been carried out. At 9:30 in the morning, 2 Argentine planes took off from the Rio Grande Naval Base heading for the islands. They were escorted by 2 other fighters, while a pair of unarmed civilian aircraft flew as a distraction, seeking to be detected by the English ships. The pilots in charge of the attack, when they left the mainland, did not yet know what their orders were. But they knew that the time would soon come to go into action. The radars that the Europeans had were very powerful. So the planes had to approach their target at water level, barely 30 meters above it, to avoid being spotted by the sensors.
El día que nos tocó el vuelo era un día como hoy, nublado, con chubascos esparcidos y con condiciones de visibilidad baja, con lo cual en otro tipo de momento hubiese sido incómodo. En ese momento para nosotros era muy favorable porque el avión superestandar está pintado de un azul muy oscuro. Cuando navega sobre el agua, que volábamos a 15 metros del agua, es indetectable visualmente porque no se lo ve. Y además, bueno, el hecho de ser 2 aviones separados, porque volábamos en forma separada, hacía que nuestra firma radar fuera también pequeña y difícil de detectar.
As a precaution, radio contact had been strictly forbidden. They could only use signs to communicate with each other. Both men had to summon their own courage and trust that their companion would fulfill his role. The Neptune scout was still in the area, hidden from British eyes and transmitting its position to its compatriots. When they were 180 kilometers from the ships, the escort fighters began to withdraw, to further reduce the chances of the Argentines being detected. The Super Etendard pilots armed their missiles and had to climb in altitude to confirm their targets. They decided to aim at the point that appeared closest on their radar. It was at that moment that the Sheffield crew detected them. At 11:04 on the morning of the 4th of May, 1982, approximately 25 kilometers from their targets, both planes fired their Exocet missiles. It was the baptism of fire for these weapons, which had not even been tested beforehand. The pilots did not wait to see the result, but turned their vehicles back towards the Argentine base. A few minutes after the explosives were launched, the crew of the HMS Sheffield saw the weapons trails approaching their ship. However, they only had time to take cover before the missiles hit.
The officer of the watch and other members of the bridge crew started to take cover. But I remember myself and the second officer of the watch becoming transfixed to the missile on its way in, which really does amaze me now when I come to think of it, but we watched it almost to the point of impact when we quickly huddled together and dropped to the floor.
One of the missiles hit the middle of the destroyer on the starboard side, penetrating 4 meters into the deck near the engine room. Its consequences were fatal. Dozens of English sailors died immediately, while more than 60 were injured. The other exocet did not manage to hit its target, with some sources stating that it was lost in the water, while others declare that it slightly damaged one of the aircraft carriers. However, the impact of one of the missiles on the cruiser Sheffield had very serious implications for the British. As had happened with the General Belgrano 2 days earlier, the attack put out of service the water pumps, so there was no way to expel the sea that was entering in droves inside the ship. In addition, a voracious fire began to spread rapidly, without the desperate men being able to fight it since the pressure of the hoses failed. The air under the hull was filled with a thick black smoke, killing several men. The poor communication between the British ships meant that the other ships traveling near the ship did not even know where the attack had come from. The cruiser Glasgow, believing it to be a submarine, dropped several explosive depth charges, which did not make any contact. The rest of the vehicles tried to assist the Sheffield, but the fire was out of control, and after 5 hours, the captain gave the order to abandon ship. The final fatalities were 21 sailors dead and 63 wounded. The Argentine pilots, meanwhile, had returned to Rio Grande at noon without knowing if their missiles had hit the target. They only learned of the success of their mission at 9 p.m. when the British defense spokesman communicated the result of the attack through the BBC.
Nos han preguntado en muchas entrevistas qué sintieron, tenían miedo, había ansiedad o estilo. En esa etapa final no podés pensar en otra cosa. No piensan en nada más que cumplir con el procedimiento que ya estuvo capacitado para ello y lograr el lanzamiento.
The flames continued to consume the Sheffield for 2 days, until finally on May 6th, the fire was brought under control. One of the cruisers was ordered to tow it out of the total exclusion zone to avoid further attacks. However, on May 10th, the ship's hull could no longer resist, and it sank in the icy waters of the South Atlantic. Thus, the HMS Sheffield became the first English ship to be destroyed by a missile since the end of World War II. The conflict between the United Kingdom and Argentina would continue, but for many, the victims of the cruiser General Belgrano had finally been avenged.
Los veía a los ingleses como venían, querían subir para arriba, y nosotros estamos arriba. Y le dije al subteniente, que era subteniente de ese entonces, Esteban Amadrili, y al sargento Tito Echeverría, le digo, váyanse porque tienen hijos ustedes, yo no. Me quedé solo.
Soledad Island, Malvinas, Argentina, 1982. A cold and desolate plain. In the distance, the fire momentarily illuminates the silhouettes of young soldiers running amidst screams and gunshots. There, under the deafening sound of shrapnel and explosions, a single man is preparing to face an army. He is not a veteran soldier or someone with combat experience. He is Oscar Poltronieri, an Argentine conscript of just 19 years old. Alone, with nothing but his machine gun and an unwavering conviction, Oscar will become the shield of his comrades, facing the British attack that seeks to destroy his unit. The Battle of Monte dos Hermanas was one of the fiercest and most crucial confrontations of the Malvinas War, a true hell on earth in which the fate of the Argentine troops hung in the balance. At this strategic point, where the height dominated the surrounding terrain, much more than a simple territorial advance was decided. The resistance of the South American country against the relentless British offensive was at stake. Under the extreme cold and a rain of shrapnel, young and exhausted soldiers clung to their positions, knowing that their defeat would open the way to the heart of the Argentine defenses. The tension was unbearable. The explosions lit up the darkness like lightning, and the enemy advanced like an unstoppable attack. In this desperate context, where survival seemed impossible, the bravery of heroes like Oscar Poltronieri would emerge, who challenged British power with courage and an unbreakable will.
Yo lo entré a buscar y no estaba. Entonces miró hacia atrás y él estaba apoyado contra una especie de roca y él tiraba y tiraba y tiraba y tiraba y tiraba y tiraba. Yo le estaba, vamos, Oscar, vamos. Yo le decía que volviera, que volviera, que volviera. Y él dice que no, me quedo. Bueno, y ahí lo pierdo de vista.
In this military history video, we will explore the life of a man as ordinary as he was extraordinary, who would go on to be decorated with the highest distinctions of the Argentine Army. Let's start with the story of Oscar Poltronieri. He was born and raised in Mercedes, Buenos Aires, in a modest family. Life in the countryside was difficult, and from a young age he learned to deal with the physical effort and difficulties inherent in the rural environment. Oscar's days were marked by hard work and the responsibilities of helping out at home. He grew up in contact with the land, livestock, and daily effort. Due to his environment, he was formed with a strong and resilient character, qualities that, although he did not yet know it, would be crucial later on. At 19, Oscar was called up for compulsory military service. Like so many other young men, his duty as a conscript led him to join the army. Without any great expectations, he thought that his service would involve a simple training routine. However, fate had other plans. On April 2, 1982, Argentina took control of the Falkland Islands, a disputed territory in the South Atlantic that had been in the works since the 19th century. The Latin American country claimed sovereignty over the islands, while the United Kingdom, which had administered them since 1833, sent a powerful military force to reclaim them. Thus, Poltronieri, along with thousands of young Argentines, was sent to a conflict in one of the most remote points on the map, changing his life forever. The war was brief but devastating. In just 10 weeks, some of the bloodiest and most brutal fighting in Argentine history took place. The young conscripts sent to the islands did not have adequate training or the necessary equipment for modern warfare. The weather conditions were extreme, and supply and communication logistics were limited. In this context of disadvantage, Oscar Poltronieri and his comrades from the 6th Mechanized Infantry Regiment found themselves on Monte dos Hermanas, a key terrain in the Argentine defense. The mountain had become a strategic point, as its elevated position allowed it to control a good part of the surrounding territory. The British knew that they had to take this place to ensure their advance towards other Argentine positions. This made Monte dos Hermanas a stage that would inevitably lead to a confrontation between the two countries. The Battle of Monte dos Hermanas was an emblematic episode in the Falklands War. The British troops, highly trained and well-equipped, advanced with determination. Unlike the young Argentines, who had limited resources, the British soldiers carried with them state-of-the-art weapons, as well as having leadership experienced in combat. The difference between the two forces was evident, both in terms of weapons and preparation. The Argentine soldiers, mostly young and inexperienced, faced a desperate situation, and the extreme climate of the islands only aggravated their situation.
Y cuando miro, veo que estaba en medio del bombardeo, entre las rocas estaban los ojitos de mis soldados, se veía con las bengalas la parte blanca de sus ojos, todos mirándome a mí esperando órdenes. Y lo más conmovedor es que había un momento para irse, era ese. Yo no iba a contar a los soldados que subían conmigo. Yo iba a decir seguirme y que me sigan.
In the midst of this hostile scenario, Poltronieri and his comrades were ordered to resist. The strategy was clear: hold their position as long as possible to slow down the British advance. Gunshots and explosions began to fill the air, and the darkness of the night was intermittently illuminated by the flashes of the explosions. The noise of the battle was deafening. The Argentine soldiers, poorly armed and exhausted by hours of tension, did their best to resist, but the enemy's advance was unstoppable. At that critical moment when everything seemed lost and the shots resounded like thunder in the cold Malvinas night, Poltronieri made a decision that would change the course of events in a way as unexpected as it was brave. His unit, overwhelmed by the British advance, retreated with each passing second. The order was clear: retreat before the defense line collapsed. However, Poltronieri, with his eyes fixed on his comrades, made a radical decision: to stay behind alone to cover their retreat.
¿Por qué les dijiste que se fueran?
Porque le había llegado una carta que hacía hace poquito, había tenido familia la señora, y entonces yo le decía que se fueran, que ellos tenían hijos, yo no.
There was no time for doubt or despair. In the midst of the darkness, between the whistling of bullets and the echo of explosions, Oscar held his machine gun tightly and took on the task of resisting. He was not thinking about himself, or his life, or the danger he was in. He only wanted to give his comrades the opportunity to escape, even if it meant facing the enemy in an impossible battle. Each bullet fired by Poltronieri was an act of defiance and a promise that he would not surrender until the last of his comrades was safe. With the deafening sound of gunfire and the cold that penetrated to the bones, this young Argentinian remained firm in his position, determined to face a much more powerful army. The enemy advanced in ranks, certain of their victory, but Poltronieri, with a mixture of fury and bravery, began to fire without ceasing. Each burst of his machine gun was a declaration of resistance, a war cry that resonated in the silence of the night. The British soldiers, surprised by the intensity of their resistance, were forced to stop and regroup. Poltronieri, meanwhile, continued to fire, changing position to avoid being hit. His goal was not to defeat the enemy, but to buy the time necessary for his comrades to escape. He knew he was risking his life, but that didn't seem to matter to him at the moment. Adrenaline and the desire to protect his comrades drove him forward.
Yo me di cuenta que empezaba a quedarme sin bocas de fuego, que empezaba a haber heridos. Yo me arrastré, le pedí al soldado Gómez que con el lanzacohete, el cañón de 90 milímetros que tenía, le tirara esa ametralladora, la del sargento Jackson, que nos tenía aferrados. Gómez me contestó que no tenía más proyectiles, tenía solamente el lanzacohete. Entonces, putié de bronca, le dije, tirá ese cañón a la miércoles, y empecé a tirar con buscate un fusil, empecé a tirar con un fusil, porque la apuntadora del lanzacohete lleva pistola, no fusil. Buscate un fusil de algún muerto, empecé a tirar con el fusil, cosa que Gómez hizo, y empecé a ver cómo replegaba yo mismo, pues ya no tenía bocas de fuego.
The British advanced confidently, convinced that Argentine resistance was weak and that the defensive lines had collapsed. But then, unexpectedly intense fire began to slow their advance. They thought they were facing an entire unit hidden among the rocks, but what they did not know was that this ferocious attack came from a single man, Oscar Poltronieri. Moving quickly between positions, he fired precise bursts from his machine gun, constantly changing position to create the illusion of a large group.
Entonces yo le tiraba hacía ráfaga y todo, y no lo dejaba tirar, que se asomaran para tirarle a los compañeros míos que estaban ahí subiendo para el otro lado. Y como no podían avanzar, entonces ¿qué hacen? Se vuelven para atrás, porque después ellos parecían que había una compañía ahí. Y resulta que estaba solo, yo me le movía por un lado para el otro.
Finally, after hours of intense resistance, Poltronieri achieved his objective. His companions were able to get to safety. Exhausted, with his body worn out and his hands shaking, Oscar also retreated, leaving behind the mountain that he had defended with his life. The battle at Monte dos Hermanas had left a deep mark on all those who participated in it. But Poltronieri had done something exceptional. His feat was recognized in the following days, when his companions told what had happened. They could not believe that this humble and simple young man had faced an entire army alone. The news of his bravery reached the ears of his superiors. Finally, the Argentine army decided to award him the highest military distinction in the country. Poltronieri became the only conscript soldier to receive this decoration, an honor reserved only for those who demonstrate extraordinary courage on the battlefield.
soy el único que tengo la Cruz, la Nación Argentina al Heroico Valor en Combate, que es esta, que tengo acá en mi pecho. Soy el único soldado, son 6 oficiales y un soldado. Porque fui destacado, me dieron 2 veces por muerto y las 2 veces aparecí en diferentes lugares con la ametralladora.
Oscar Poltronieri returned to Argentina as a hero, but his life after the war was not easy. Oscar maintained ties with various ex-combatants and even became friends with a British soldier who participated in the conflict. The war placed them on opposite sides, but time and maturity gave them the opportunity to find in each other someone who understands better than anyone the weight of those extreme moments.
La guerra me dejó algo más importante. Que un enemigo es un amigo, es un hermano.
Estás hablando del soldado británico que hoy es casi un hermano para vos.
Like many veterans, Poltronieri struggled to adapt to civilian life and witnessed the neglect to which many of his comrades were subjected. The war left him with scars, both physical and emotional, that would accompany him for the rest of his life. Despite this, Oscar never considered himself a hero. For him, what he did at Monte dos Hermanas was simply fulfilling his duty and protecting his comrades.
Eso es lo que me dejó la guerra, mejor dicho.
Contame cómo está Malvinas en tu corazón.
Sé que Malvinas es un sentimiento para mí.
Poltronieri's bravery reminds us that true heroism lies not in seeking glory, but in being willing to sacrifice everything for others. His act of valor is an example of dedication and commitment that inspires entire generations of Argentines and people around the world. Oscar Poltronieri's legacy is a reminder of the humanity that underlies the darkest conflicts. Amid the brutality of war, he found the strength to do the right thing, facing a much more powerful enemy without hesitation. His story lives on, not only as a chapter in Argentine history, but as a testimony that, even in the most difficult times, there is always room for courage and compassion. Although the dispute over the Falkland Islands remains unresolved, Argentina continues to appeal to dialogue and peaceful means to achieve a shared sovereignty agreement or a path to the recovery of the islands. This is what Oscar Poltronieri and all his fellow veterans wish, to honor his memory and that of his fallen comrades. Now, after learning about the incredible life of this hero of the Malvinas War, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you very much for having accompanied us until the end. We look forward to seeing you again in our next military history video.